Stop for a second and think about your morning routine. What's the very first thing you do after waking up? Do you reach for your phone, move your body, or perhaps brew a hot drink? For countless people across the globe, coffee is far more than a beverage. It is a daily companion, a comforting beginning, and a tiny spark that activates the brain. Each and every day, over 2 billion cups of coffee are consumed worldwide. This tells us that at nearly any given moment, somebody, somewhere, is holding a steaming mug. Coffee provides energy, but it also offers us something else: space to reflect, to connect, and to imagine. It brings people together in cozy cafes, hectic workplaces, and peaceful homes. It has risen to become the second most traded commodity on earth, surpassed only by oil. Nations went to war over it, empires built their fortunes upon it, and revolutions ignited alongside it. Yet here lies the surprising truth. The way we prepare coffee today, roasting, grinding, and brewing, was never the result of careful planning. It was not uncovered by royalty or by men of science. Its origins trace back to a herd of energetic goats and an observant man living in the Ethiopian highlands. Yes, goats. And that fortunate accident would go on to reshape the course of human history. So today, let us travel back through time. Let us explore how one tiny red fruit grew into the most beloved drink on the planet. But this is more than a tale about coffee. It is a tale about wonder, happy accidents, and the remarkable power of human discovery. So get comfortable, take it easy, and perhaps enjoy a sip from your own cup. This is the story of coffee's accidental greatness. Before coffee entered our lives, the world looked very different. People rose with the sun and slept when darkness fell. There was no reliable method to stay alert, no simple remedy for fatigue. Once night arrived, exhaustion would set in and activity would cease. The drinks available back then were basic: water, milk, and wine. Water was frequently unsafe to consume. Milk would turn bad very quickly. Wine and beer were commonly drunk throughout the day, even in the morning. These drinks helped people unwind, but they also left them drowsy and unfocused. Nothing existed that could maintain both wakefulness and concentration. Across the arid lands and settlements of Arabia and North Africa, existence was demanding. The days brought intense heat, the nights stretched long, and labor never ceased. Merchants, wanderers, and scholars regularly worked deep into the night. For certain groups, such as the Sufi monks, keeping vigil was an act of devotion. They sought communion with God during the still, dark hours, but they required assistance. They needed something capable of keeping them awake. By that point, people were already familiar with the small red berries growing on wild bushes. Some consumed them raw as a source of energy. Others combined them with fat from animals to produce portable food for extended travel. But nobody imagined that the tiny seed within, what we now call a coffee bean, held world-changing potential. It was simply another plant growing in the wild, unremarkable and overlooked. Humanity was on the verge of something new, something that could settle the body while sharpening the mind. A drink that offered alertness without intoxication, vitality without disorder. It only required one attentive soul, one inquisitive spirit willing to see what others had missed. Our story takes root in the lush highlands of Ethiopia, over 1,000 years in the past. A young goat herder by the name of Kaldi lived there. He was an ordinary man. Day after day, he guided his flock up into the hills to graze and roam. He cared deeply for his animals and understood their habits well. Until one afternoon, something unusual caught his attention. His goats were leaping about and dashing around with unusual enthusiasm. They appeared joyful and bursting with energy. Kaldi was puzzled. This was not their usual behavior. He followed them and discovered they had been nibbling on small red fruits from a leafy green shrub. Intrigued, Kaldi plucked a few berries and tried them for himself. Before long, he felt alert, energized, and alive. Kaldi thought, "These berries are something special. They bring both power and happiness." Eager to share what he had found, he brought the berries to a monastery close by. He told a monk there everything that had occurred. But the monk grew fearful. He declared the berries to be the devil's work and cast them into the flames. What followed was truly extraordinary. As the fruits burned, a rich and wonderful fragrance spread through the air. The monks were captivated by the warm, sweet aroma. They retrieved the roasted seeds from the fire and ground them up. Then they stirred the powder into boiling water. That evening, the monks drank this new dark liquid and remained alert throughout their prayers. That was the very first cup of coffee. It was not born from scientific research or deliberate invention, but from chance and curiosity. Chaldee's goats set it all in motion. A cautious monk carried it forward, and a simple error gave birth to something that would transform the world. The greatest discoveries often begin with a receptive mind and a quietly curious soul. The legend of Chaldee and the monks was just the opening chapter. But coffee's true voyage, the one that molded our modern world, unfolded many centuries later. The humble beans made their way across the Red Sea, traveling from Ethiopia to Yemen. There, in the 15th century, coffee discovered its spiritual home. In Yemen, a community of devout men known as Sufis adopted the drink. They required something to sustain them through lengthy nights of worship. They found that roasting and brewing the beans produced a richer, more powerful drink, one that sharpened their focus and brought inner calm. In the early days, they worked without any equipment. They roasted beans in small iron pans held over open flames. They listened intently for the faint popping sounds. They breathed in the air to judge when the roast had reached its peak. It was craft, not formula. A slow and mindful process guided by instinct. At times the beans would char. At times the brew came out too harsh or too faint. But the Sufis persisted. They continued, time after time. With each failure, new understanding was gained. They learned that a longer roast produced a deeper, more complex taste. That heat had the power to draw out the soul of the bean. Gradually, knowledge of the drink spread beyond monastery walls. Merchants, pilgrims, and scholars all began sampling it. They named it kahwa, a word meaning the drink that fortifies. People consumed it while studying, praying, working, and simply to feel present and alive. For the very first time, a drink existed that heightened the mind rather than clouding it. It wove itself into their spiritual practice and eventually into everyday life. In modest clay vessels set over open flames, people began preparing coffee wherever they gathered. At home, in bazaars, and in mosques. It had moved beyond being a mere discovery. It had transformed into a custom, a ceremony, a way of spending time together and exchanging words. The path of coffee was one of endurance and belief. Nobody created it in a laboratory. It was refined across generations through small trials and quiet dedication. The monks and Sufis sought only to remain awake for prayer. Yet in doing so, they stirred the entire world to life. For many generations, coffee belonged to monks and mystics. Then one day, everything shifted. Coffee stepped out from the sheltered walls of the monastery and flowed into the vibrant streets of the city. It was no longer reserved solely for spiritual practice. It had become a drink for everyone. In the 1500s, coffee arrived in the holy city of Mecca, one of the most significant centers of the Islamic world. Its flavor, its warmth, and the vitality it provided were immediately embraced. Soon, modest gathering places appeared where men could come together, sit, and drink. These were the earliest coffeehouses the world had ever seen. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with talk and laughter, the scent of coffee blending with melodies and spirited discussion. People debated commerce, recited poetry, and argued over politics. They engaged in games, exchanged stories, and voiced their aspirations. The coffeehouse had become an entirely new kind of place, welcoming to ideas and to people alike. A writer of that era observed in Mecca, "People drink kahwa and assemble in great crowds. They speak of their matters and remain awake without hardship." It was accurate. Coffee equipped people with the ability to stay alert, but also to think, to envision, to produce. This was the true turning point. Coffee had ceased to be merely a drink. It had become a force. It reshaped how people labored, how they gathered, and how knowledge traveled. Within those modest rooms filled with warmth and aroma, the foundations of modern society were quietly being laid. Every great innovation encounters resistance, and coffee was no exception. As it spread through cities, not everyone welcomed it. Certain rulers, religious figures, and monarchs viewed it with suspicion, a drink capable of stirring minds and unsettling order. In Mecca, around 1511, the city's governor outlawed coffee. He claimed it bred idleness and defiance. He believed coffeehouses had become breeding grounds for rumor and disorder. Those who drank too heavily of it, he warned, might neglect their religious duties. But people's attachment to coffee was too strong to be severed by decree. They gathered discreetly in hidden rooms, passing cups and speaking in hushed tones. For many, coffee represented something deeper than a drink. It stood for liberty. It sharpened their minds, encouraged questioning, and fueled their visions. When coffee reached European shores, the debate grew even more heated. Some church officials branded it the beverage of the devil. They argued it originated in Muslim lands and ought to be kept from Christian hands. Then came an unexpected development. Pope Clement VIII chose to sample it for himself. After his very first taste, he smiled and declared, "This drink of Satan is so wonderfully good that it would truly be a shame to leave it only for unbelievers." With those words, he gave coffee his blessing, and the people rejoiced. Even so, not every ruler embraced the new beverage. In England, King Charles II attempted to shut down coffee houses. He claimed they sheltered troublemakers and endless chatter, but public outcry forced him to abandon the ban. Coffee had prevailed. No authority could suppress it. It had come to embody the spirit of freedom, of honest dialogue, open thought, and generous hearts. Once coffee gained acceptance, the world began to transform. Wherever coffee traveled, it carried with it new customs, new vigor, and new thinking. The modest drink that had its origins in the Ethiopian mountains had now captured the imagination of great cities worldwide. Across Europe, coffee houses emerged as the pulse of daily life. Their doors were open to all, regardless of wealth or profession. A single penny bought you a cup, which is why they earned the name penny universities. Because for the cost of that cup, the conversations inside could teach you more than any lecture hall. Within those walls, people explored science, debated art, and wrestled with philosophy. They circulated books, clashed over governance, and painted pictures of the future. It was in these very spaces that sweeping transformations took root. The rise of the press, the birth of new technologies, and the stirring of revolutions. In London, one coffee house grew into Lloyd's of London, the world's pioneering insurance institution. Another evolved into the London Stock Exchange. In France, luminaries such as Voltaire gathered to champion freedom and rational thought. And in Vienna, composers drew their inspiration over dark, steaming cups. But perhaps the most profound shift came at the breakfast table. Before coffee, ale, and wine were standard morning drinks. They left people sluggish and heavy-headed. With coffee's arrival, mornings became clearer, more energetic, and sharper. The world, for the first time, had truly roused itself. Coffee gave humanity more than a boost of energy. It gave them a sense of belonging. It turned strangers into companions, and silence into lively exchange. It embedded itself into cultures, professions, and personal bonds, and it continues to shape our days, one cup at a time. As the world's love affair with coffee deepened, something remarkable unfolded. Coffee began to move. It traversed seas, scaled mountains, and crossed empires. What had once been a regional drink in Ethiopia and Yemen was becoming a global phenomenon. The Arabs initially guarded coffee as a closely held secret. They would char the beans before export to prevent anyone from cultivating them abroad. But before long, other nations set their sights on this prized commodity. During the 1600s, Dutch traders succeeded in smuggling live plants out of Yemen. They went on to cultivate them in their colonial territories in Java, Sri Lanka, and South America. The French were not far behind. In 1723, a young officer in the French Navy named Gabriel de Clieu transported a coffee seedling from Paris to the Caribbean island of Martinique. The voyage was grueling and fraught with danger. Violent storms, the threat of pirates, and desperate thirst. Yet he nursed the plant through it all, rationing his own water to keep it alive. From that solitary seedling, countless coffee trees would eventually spread across Latin America. In the years that followed, coffee plantations expanded throughout tropical regions: Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. But this expansion carried a heavy cost. The labor was largely performed by enslaved workers and impoverished farmers. Coffee generated immense riches for some, while inflicting great suffering on many more. By the 19th century, Brazil had claimed the title of the world's foremost coffee producer. The crop became the backbone of its economy. Still, the drink's popularity continued to climb without pause. Industrial-scale roasting and grinding operations began to emerge. Demand for coffee was insatiable. At home, at work, everywhere. The 20th century ushered in yet another wave of transformation. The espresso machine, born in Italy, delivered a swifter, more intense, and more flavorful brew. Then came instant coffee, which put the drink within reach of soldiers, laborers, and anyone leading a fast-paced life. Coffee had grown beyond a mere beverage into an emblem of contemporary existence. Today, upwards of 70 nations cultivate coffee. It links farmers in equatorial regions to urban professionals in cities stretching from São Paulo to Saigon. Coffee powers conversation, fuels artistic endeavors, drives commerce, and nurtures ambition. It has emerged as one of the most powerful threads connecting different cultures, a humble cup that draws the world together. The story of coffee is not simply the story of a drink. It is the story of people, their aspirations, their toil, and their unquenchable curiosity. From a shepherd and his spirited goats, to monks deep in prayer, to merchants, intellectuals, and laborers, coffee has left its mark on every walk of life. It began as a fortunate accident and became a symbol of human connection. It kept people awake, but it also helped them awaken within, to think, to learn, to create, and to share. Each cup holds within it centuries of history and the warmth of countless human hands. Writers have described it as the fuel that powers the mind. Artists have said it coaxes ideas into bloom like the first light of dawn, and perhaps there is real truth in that. Coffee offers us far more than a simple burst of energy. It brings us clarity, optimism, and a sense of rhythm. It is the breathing space between confusion and creation. Today, when you settle in with your cup, whether in a quiet morning or a lively cafe, you are participating in this vast and enduring human story. A story rooted in curiosity, nurtured by patience, and driven by the desire to remain awake in a world that so easily drifts to sleep. From open flames and wild berries to modern machines and bustling cafes, coffee reminds us of humanity's greatest gift: the ability to take something small and ordinary and turn it into something that reshapes the world. So the next time you raise your cup, honor this journey. A journey that started with goats, sailed across oceans, sparked revolutions, and now rests gently in your hands. Because the story of coffee is, in truth, the story of us.